Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Average Gamer podcast. My name's Grant. I run a YouTube channel called Over the Edge. I'm also joined by Sully, One Guy's Opinion, and Joe Chip.
Hello.
Hello.
So we're just going to start by just going around and talking about what we've been up to this week. So, Joe, do you want to start off?
Yeah, well, the last couple of weeks, I've not been doing a lot of gaming, to be honest, because I was away in Florence. I got back from Florence about a week ago now. And since then, I've been playing with the PlayStation VR and my Xbox One S.
Sully, what about you? What have you been up to? Played any games?
I'm still actually playing Gears of War 4. I love it.
Okay.
Yep, I've been dabbling in a little bit of Battlefield 1, which, it's probably not as good as what I thought it would be. That's just my opinion. I'm actually having a lot of issues. I think it's driver issues with the online side of things. It's just really crappy performance, which apparently is just related to my 1070 GPU. That's apparently no other GPU in the world's affected by it. So awesome.
Great.
So that's always good. So who knows when I'm getting support for that. But other than that, just been doing YouTube. And I've actually been overhauling my spare room, which is my YouTube room. I guess I have a whole room for YouTube. But I'm actually getting ready to switch the channel over to video. So I've been kind of putting together a new desk, shelving, kind of dressing up the area that's going to be on screen. So I've just kind of been trying to nut that out of late.
Nice.
I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but it's probably going to be after this summer because you guys all know Australian summers, can get pretty hot and I haven't got ducted. So I don't want to be sitting there sweating on my new setup. Just, as much as everything else looks nice, I don't want to be the negative point of it.
Okay, cool. So since we did the first episode, I was sort of playing a multitude of games, or about 3 different games, but since I got Skyrim, I literally have just been sinking so many hours into that. The game is just incredibly addictive. I didn't play it first time round. I think I'm making up for lost time because looking at my save file, I seem to have hit nearly 50 hours since Friday. But I don't know if that's all game, because I put the game on pause a lot, so I'm not sure if that's all game time. If it is, that's bad. Well, depends which way you look at it. So, it's very. I'll talk about it a little bit later on because I'll touch on it in one of my subjects. But other than that, I did do a video, although I haven't done as much YouTube stuff as I wanted to. But I'm going to try and change that in the coming week. So. Because I've got a couple of things I want to do, and some exactly. That's one of them, believe me. But I've just picked up Titanfall 2. I got that today
Nice.
because I heard good things about it, and hopefully that'll be a bit of a contrast from Skyrim as well. Because I like to play one sort of in and out, sort of fast-paced game if I'm playing something that's slower. And are more RPG based because I like the contrast.
Yep, that's understandable.
Yeah, so that's me. Okay, we've got sort of individual subjects we want to talk about, as we did in the first episode. And I believe the first subject that we were going to cover was Joe's subject, which was PSVR.
Yeah, as I said just a minute ago, when I finally got around to it, I've been fiddling around with PlayStation VR and it's been quite a good experience so far. Anyone watching my video, shameless plug again.
Oh my God, Joe.
I got that one in quick. Basically, it's been good. The experience, and I keep saying that word experience because basically games, are they games? I don't know. Some of them feel like games, some of them don't feel so much like games. The thing I enjoyed the most was going into the deep, or whatever they call it. Into the deep. And that's not a game at all. You just sit there and look around, and that's all you do. So it's not a game at all.
Is that the one with the shark cage?
Yeah, you've got a shark attack. Yeah,
yeah, I've seen that. Yeah,
yeah, and it's fun, but it's not a game. It's just like a demo, really. But it is quite a good demo, and it's one of the better looking things that I've seen so far. There's some issues with the system. It's. Well, I said in the video that it's a bit of a pain in the arse to set up. There's cables everywhere and so on and so forth. And I couldn't play it for too long either. I found that was a bit, it was a bit difficult to play it for too long. Yeah. But yeah, it's quite good fun. But what I want to broaden this out into is to talk about where we think it's going and whether PlayStation VR's and VR in general is going to be something that's going to be big moving forward. And I just wondered what you guys thought.
Well, can I just start by saying
well.
that fantastic video, Joe. I watched it yesterday, and I'm someone who wouldn't even consider buying PSVR, but after watching your video and hearing your thoughts, straight away I'm toying with the idea. But that kind of leads into, for me personally, like you said, with all these demos, they almost still kind of feel like, yeah, they're tech demos, but they almost feel like proof of concept still. There's nothing on the PSVR that I've seen that makes me go, like, for example, the original Xbox with Halo that goes, wow, FPS experience on console. Holy crap, I have to go pick that up. So at the moment, I'm still kind of in that same boat. And like you said, with, what was the racing game? Drive Club, was it?
Yeah, Drive Club VR,
See, when you said that obviously the visual fidelity's been scaled back because obviously the demands of VR are greater than what can actually be put on.
Scaled back a lot too.
When you say games being scaled backwards to be playable on VR, that straight away turns me off.
I'd have to agree with that. I mean, I would echo a lot of what Sully said. I'm not particularly interested in PlayStation VR because, I mean, one of the things that concerns me is the visual fidelity just isn't great because I think it's probably the nature of where the technology is at the moment. And to make it affordable, they probably had to do a lot of scaling back in terms of sort of PSVR itself. Compared to, say, maybe Oculus and Vive. I don't know what resolutions they run at, but I would guess that the PSVR is not as good as, for instance, those. And I know that you have to have a higher end PC to run them anyway.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think you're right in the sense that at the moment there's too many experimental kind of experiences which aren't really what I would qualify as full length games because by the nature of the technology, I don't think you can. I mean, you said that yourself that you couldn't sit down and play it for very long, and I think that is an issue at the moment. I think
it will continue to be. Actually, I don't think it's something that's going to go away.
It's tied directly to the hardware. The hardware has to be at a certain level before you can iron out those effects that give you nausea and stuff like that, like the frame rate and the motion blur and stuff. But in order to iron that out, you do have to have very, very beefy hardware.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's going to improve at all with, the PlayStation Pro. But, the stuff I've heard where people have compared it to the Vive and the Oculus is they've said it compares pretty well. So, I mean, I can't talk on that personally because I've not tried the other two. No. But a lot of people have said that it compares fairly well. So I don't know if it's specific to PlayStation VR or if it's just the nature of, well, as you say, where we are with the tech at the moment.
I think you're probably right in the sense that it's very early days in terms of the tech's literally just entered the home. It's entered into mainstream consumer culture, in the last sort of year. I mean, and I think it's at a stage now where I personally don't think it's going to hit mass market for probably another few years because I think it's a little too early on. I think the games are a little bit like the Wild West where nobody really knows what genres are going to work. It's kind of like the early days of gaming actually when we didn't really have genres because people didn't really know what worked, because game systems were quite rudimentary and VR at the moment is quite rudimentary. It's not really that technically developed to be able to offer us like a full HD experience, so I don't think it's going to take off yet. I think I think I read something about Sony's sales projections weren't exactly in the millions, let's put it that way.
That's good. That's good to play on the safe side.
The counterpoint to that though is that I still have to say, with the reservations I had going in and the reservations I still have now, the actual experience I had of using it was better than I was expecting. So the next question for me to ask you guys is, do you think that it's going to be here to stay, or do you think it's going to fizzle out like the Wii, with the paddle
I personally
things?
think it's on a slightly different level than the Wii and what the whole Kinect was and the motion controls were. And that's purely because it's not controller orientated like the Kinect and the Move and the Wiimotes were. It's more of a way to visually engage with your gaming experience. So I think it kind of falls into the background, if you're not interacting with it as such. It's more appealing because you can just sit there with a controller and play your game. And for me personally, the ultimate version of VR, which they're not there yet, and this may not ever happen, but I'm not really interested in like looking around, moving around, or waving my arms around. To sell a VR to me, for example, Microsoft, if they brought out a VR set, if I could get Halo
coming,
on,
isn't it?
I think it is. If I could get Halo on VR and basically just have it replace my main TV, and I could strap it onto my face, covers all of my peripheral vision, and basically maybe it felt like I was inside the Master Chief's helmet, and it was from a fixed point of view, you couldn't look around, and I'd just play the game normally. It also takes away all that other crap, which I think developers don't know how to tackle at the moment. Like, there's no standard. Like, they don't know how to get people to interact with their environment, because, a lot of the time people are in small offices and rooms. There's no standard for how you develop a game for VR.
Yeah, I think the issue of moving around is one that's not really been properly solved yet, from what I know. I mean, I've yet to try any VR, so I can't really talk from an experience of knowing actually what it's like. But I like what you said about, if I could put the unit on and play a game like Halo, it's obviously going to increase the immersion, and it's going to make the game, a lot more exciting. I think, if you
just a screen with,
I think it's. Yeah,
there's
exactly.
There's a practical consideration for me though, and this is the same as I found with the Wiimotes and whatnot. Is I find myself thinking, do I put the VR headset on or do I pick up my controller? And the answer has been quite often, oh bloody hell, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to pick up my controller and play a normal game. Because, by the time you've plugged in the VR headset and you've calibrated it and all the rest of it, 10 minutes has gone by and you've kind of lost your interest a bit. And I've had this.
It's not exactly spontaneous, is
it? Exactly. And I think that's a kind of that's an impediment to actually getting into that system and wanting to play it more. And you can't sit around and play with your friends either. Well, certainly not yet, anyway.
I don't think it will replace the way we game. I just think it's another way that's available to us to game. And I think it will stay. I don't think it will disappear. But as to whether it becomes a mass market movement, I can't see it happening at the moment. But that's only because I don't think the technology has been smoothed out yet. I think the fact that it's another way that we can game, but in a way that's going to be more long-term than something like the Wii sort of waggle or move or anything like that. I think it will stay beyond that. It's not a flash in the pan trend.
You've basically come down to exactly the same position that I arrived at.
I was going to say, there's one reason why it will never become the mainstream for how we play or interact with our games. And that's because on the other side, we have a traditional TV. Now, a traditional TV is something you can buy, the entire family can enjoy, and it has more than one purpose, not just gaming. And I think because of that, VR is never going to become the mainstream way of interacting with our games. And I think because in the world we live in, everybody has a TV. Everybody wants the latest and greatest TV. And because of that, VR will never replace our main screen in the living room.
Yeah, it'll be a secondary device.
But another point is as well, which I think is interesting, is VR necessarily going to be used in the future primarily for gaming, or are there other applications for it?
Yeah, good point.
Because for me personally,
that is a very good point.
There's a lot of obvious areas, like in schools with education and all that, it's a far more interactive experience. But for me, the idea, and I think the idea that I find more exciting, is being able to just lay in bed at the end of the night and watch a movie. And as you guys probably know, there's nothing more annoying than trying to watch something in bed and try to prop your head up in the right position to see the screen, If I can just lay back on my pillow and put the VR on and just enjoy a movie, then to me that's probably cooler than playing the next Halo in VR.
Yeah, but it has to be wireless to do that.
I think if anything, you've hit on quite a significant point, which is, I think if anything, gaming will probably be one of the least popular uses for VR, because it has so many other potential uses in terms of, like you say, education, scientific, maybe even medical. I can see it, maybe being used by doctors. It's quite obvious applications for surgery maybe as well and things like that. So I think gaming, is just literally just one aspect of what VR might become in the future.
Again, I agree entirely. Yeah, I think that the potential is phenomenal for training and stuff like that.
Exactly, yeah.
Side note, did you guys hear that? I did read it somewhere, but don't take it as gospel, that Microsoft is intending to release the HoloLens. It's actually going into production.
Ah, no, I hadn't heard that.
To me, I find that more interesting than PSVR, like augmented reality. Like the thought of buying a HoloLens, because I enjoy Minecraft. I enjoy a lot of those games with my girlfriend because she's more of a casual gamer, and I enjoy it as well. But the idea of being able to pick up a couple of HoloLenses and turn our living space into a Minecraft field, that to me blows my mind.
I find that actually quite personally more interesting than VR.
Mm-hmm.
I think augmented reality has huge potential.
We've got an outbreak of agreement here tonight. We're agreeing far too much.
Yeah, let's have a fight then. Just kidding.
I'll smash a plate.
So the next thing we were going to talk about is, I believe, the Nintendo Switch. Is that right?
Yeah, so basically I'm in the same boat as Joe here. I have my opinion on the Switch, but I really want to see what you guys thought of it and what the likelihood of its success are. It's a pretty broad stroke, that one, but go to town on it.
I mean, since that video was released, which was what, a couple of weeks ago now, was it? Or was it last week?
I think it was right
before
we recorded episode 1, actually.
It was, wasn't it? Okay. Well, when I saw that video, my instinct was, when I was watching it, was, okay, this is interesting. You know, this is a little bit of a departure, but then I thought, well, this is exactly the sort of thing Nintendo need to do, because the Wii U is basically, not to be blunt about it, but I'm going to be, has failed as a console. It's not hit the sales targets. It's done 14 million or something, which compared to the PS4 and Xbox One is pretty much a disaster. So they had to do something different. They are doing something very different. I will say, however, having thought about it over the last sort of week and a half, I'm not sure exactly that their gimmick is going to be enough to make a difference in the console arena today, because we are still pretty much about a box in front of the TV playing the highest resolution games that we can play. I mean, the PS4 Pro is just about to be released.
We don't want to compromise for a bit of both worlds, you know, whether it be handheld or console, which is what the Switch is.
It lacks focus.
Isn't it just 720p, that screen as well?
Now, the tablet that you actually take on the go with you is the actual screen is 720p. I'm not saying it's limited to 720p performance. It might very well get 1080p on your screen at home. It's just the tablet that's 720p.
Right, okay. I mean, that might not be that big a deal, considering that you might not need that higher resolution on the go. But having said that, I do think it is an issue as to how powerful the console's specs are going to be when you're actually sat in front of the TV playing it. Because let's face it, that's the majority of when you're going to be using it, isn't it? That's what I would think. I mean, I might be wrong on that. I don't know what you guys think. But
it's a tough one to toss up because they haven't come out and given us solid specs for the machine. We know it's somewhere in line with the original Xbox and the PS4. Yeah. But to me, when you look at the PS4 and the original Xbox, look at the ventilation that those systems have just due to the heat they create. And then look at the Nintendo Switch. All the performance and compute takes place in a tablet compact environment. Now, I know the hardware inside of it, it's different. It's running off a chip. I think it's like an NVIDIA chip.
Basically mobile tech. Yeah, it's the Tegra, isn't it?
Yeah, but how much... Is it really going to be on par or better than the original PS4, the Xbox One, considering its form factor? And the heat it's going to create? I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but it's an interesting question.
Well, I mean, it's like an iPad kind of chip, isn't it? I mean, it makes me wonder... Are they sort of almost saying, well, we're not going to try and compete with the Xbox One and PS4 in terms of raw power?
I think that's exactly what they're doing.
That is what they're doing. Yeah. That mindset scares me as well, because I think that can easily translate into, well, we're just going to do our own thing, and then that leads to them, at the end of the day, not having third-party support again.
I think they will not get third-party support. I think they'll get maybe some third-party support early on, and then it'll tail off like it did with the Wii U.
Yep, and it's catch-22 because you can't sell a system without third-party support.
No.
And, third-party support won't come to your system unless the sales are there. So Nintendo have dug themselves this hole over a large period of time, obviously, but this is ultimately where they're at now.
I mean, I just as a parallel, on launch, I bought the Dreamcast in 1999, and that console was killed by the fact that it couldn't get the major third-party publishers to release any games. EA refused to actually sign an agreement with Sega. And that killed the console dead because they couldn't release any of the major sports franchises. They had to go and do their own version of NBA. And in the end, it was almost as if the publisher was saying, well, we're going to put all our chips in with the PS2. And the console was dead pretty much when the PS2 was released. My concern with the Switch is that something similar is going to happen. Like you say, if they can't get the third-party support, that console is going to die very, very rapidly. Because it's almost as if they're saying, okay, we're not going to compete on power. We're going to go all in with this mobile thing gimmick. And my concern is how many people are actually going to fully utilize that aspect of the console, So it's...
Well, I think it will probably sell like hotcakes in Japan and die in the water everywhere else, to be honest. That's my gut feeling with it.
I was going to say, Japan in general, you look at the demographic and the statistics for the Nintendo 3DS sale, and actually there, like percentage-wise compared to other consoles, I read this a while ago, so it may not be accurate now, but the 3DS is huge. It's humongous over there. So I think handheld gaming in general over there is very big, so this will appeal to that demographic.
Yeah.
But that's not a big enough market in and of itself.
No. And that's why the Xbox One has fuck all support in Japan, because they can't sell the system there and it's not important. Like, that Japan's not important for the console.
I mean, they have tried desperately, bless them, Microsoft, haven't they, to break Japan for the Xbox. But
for 360 days, yeah.
It's just like bashing your head against a brick wall. But obviously, in different regions, people game differently. But my comment on that would be, the 3DS has done tremendously well in Japan, but the ecosystem is changing, even in places like Japan. People are gaming on mobile, obviously, and gamers are changing their habits, in territories like Japan. So will they actually put, their faith in the Switch? Or will they be gaming on mobile and will it become something that's kind of trying to bridge the gap between console and mobile, but ends up falling in between and not hitting any of those two markets properly?
They're going to be, exactly. They're going to be fighting on two fronts, in effect.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be equipped to fight on either of them because they're not powerful enough to compete with the home console market. And they're going to get overtaken swiftly by the mobile market.
Exactly, because it's fixed hardware. It's not upgrading every year like we do with our phone contracts.
Exactly.
Yes,
but
precisely.
Having said that, if there is any market left for handhelds such as the Nintendo 3DS, which actually, fun fact, the Nintendo 3DS, I believe, is up in sales and it has been growing every year in sales since its release.
That's interesting.
So that's to me, that's
mental.
That's a positive outlook for the Switch, I think. But like you said, it's when you already have a PS4 and an Xbox One, it's certainly not going to win on the home console front, at least with the I wouldn't say mainstream, probably the middle to hardcore gamers, because we already all have Xbox Ones, we already have PS4s, and we're probably excited about PSVR. And Switch does none of that.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw. I saw an article linked on Twitter. I haven't read it yet, but it basically, the headline was Nintendo say Switch is not aimed at core gamers, which got alarm bells ringing in my head a bit when I read that. It's like, well, who is it aimed at then? Because you've already alienated this market.
Yeah, you can clearly tell that it's aimed at probably people my age in their late 20s that grew up with probably the golden days of Nintendo, like the SNES and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's still aimed at the casual market. There's not a shred of advertising in that reveal trailer to me that goes, bang, this is for the hardcore, other than maybe the Skyrim remastered footage, which isn't even a confirmed title for the Nintendo Switch.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's, I mean, the fact that it is probably more or less, they're hanging the hook and hat on the fact that they want casual sales to kickstart the Switch. Is that going to happen now? Like in a different age where we do have tablets, we have smartphones, and casual gamers, like my girlfriend, she owned a Wii back in the day and she loved it. But as soon as the iPhone came along, that was it for her as far as console gaming went.
Yeah, I think...
So is it enough? Is the Switch appealing to the casual gamer? Because if it's not, I think it's dead on arrival already. Because we already know the hardcore, unless you're a diehard Nintendo fan, you're not picking a Switch up because you've already got a PS4 and an Xbox One.
Exactly.
Their approach as well is, I'm sorry to bring this one up, but their approach to, YouTubers and all that kind of stuff, the free marketing, if you like, they've got such a lockdown approach to these things. They're living like in the past. It's like 15 years ago is where Nintendo seemed to be living.
Absolutely.
And everyone else has moved on, you know, and their policies towards developers, their policies towards YouTubers and the people who would give them loads of free marketing is so closed in and so controlled that they're actually shooting themselves in the foot.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, they had this really strange set of policies, didn't they, in their cartridge days, where they would say to developers, okay, you have to buy our cartridges for, say, $35, and then, you know, you can make profit on whatever it's sold at. I mean, you think Sony are bad. Sony have some outdated practices. They do. But Nintendo, like you say, are living in the past. They hit a fluke with the Wii. They didn't quite know why and how it took off. It just did. But it was very much one of those curves of popularity that kind of rapidly sunk when people moved on to other things like mobile.
Mm-hmm.
The casual gamers, at the end of the day, if this console doesn't appeal to average gamers, who is going to buy it? You know, because there isn't anyone else.
Well, the Nintendo hardcore.
Yeah, but is that enough? I mean, how big is that audience now? I would guess that it's not actually. It's been dwindling each year because the people that stay loyal to Nintendo, I think, it's been shrinking and shrinking. You know, because they keep being disappointed with the products they're being given. They seem to be getting.
Well, and they keep being shafted.
Yeah, ever since I think the N64 was downwards, each console apparently has sold less than the previous one. Apart from the Wii, obviously the Wii was the spike. You know, it was a bit of an anomaly,
yeah.
But basically,
it was just the time. The time of the release for the Wii was at the perfect time. You know, where right before mobile gaming, and you had that fascinating cheap buy-in for motion controls.
Absolutely,
Yep.
And PlayStation hadn't got their act together with the PS3. It was too expensive, so they kind of slipped in that gap. Really, you know the Xbox had just been released. The 360 was kind of building a market share, but there was room for another player to come in, and Nintendo kind of snuck in and said, okay, well, let's make it all about fun, you know.
And everyone went out and bought the Wii and one game.
Yeah, exactly. They did, you know. But it was kind of one of those things that lasted about a year and a half before nobody was playing it anymore. If you talk to people, they stop playing the Wii after a while. Well, I think we've pretty much covered as much as we're going to in terms of the Switch. Should we move on to the last subject, which is about how games have evolved over the years? It was something I was thinking about in the week because I was trying to come up with some ideas for a new video. And one of the things I wanted to sort of touch on was the fact that with this generation of gaming, you know, I can't remember exactly how many generations we're in now, but games have evolved to such a degree as the technology's changed throughout the years that some genres which were once popular have completely died out. But also, interestingly enough, the revival of this kind of indie gaming has almost brought some genres back to life. I mean, I was talking earlier on Discord about the fact that the 2D platformer had almost died out by the time we got to, I guess, the PS3 and 360 era in terms of popularity. But because of the lower barrier for entry for indie games on console, you know, with Xbox Arcade and PlayStation Network, that genre was sort of coming back. I mean, games like Fez and Shadow Complex sort of made it popular again. But I guess this is quite a broad subject, but do you feel that games have evolved technically over the years, and they're much bigger productions now, there's a huge amount of money put into making games, but have they evolved for the better necessarily?
There's the big question.
In your
They're
opinion?
certainly more immersive. They're certainly more immersive and visually probably more eye-catching with just the visual fidelity.
Yeah, but does that make them better? I mean, when you
Not
think
necessarily, no.
no,
Well, if you take something like Doom when it came out in the day,
yeah,
and you look at that game now, and it's very simplistic, but it was very focused as well. And if you compare it to some of the shooters now, technically they blow it out of the water, you know, the Call of Duties and so on and so forth. But I enjoyed playing that far more than I do some of the first-person shooters that are out there now. And I'm not saying all the shooters that are out there now, because there's plenty of good ones. But for its time, it was a very focused package, and it knew exactly what it was delivering. Going back to the Switch now, people not knowing what they're delivering. But I think if you look at what's happened, say, for instance, with first-person shooters, there's been a lot of fragmentation that's occurred. With it splitting into, you've got your single-player experience and you've got the online experience. And it's almost, they're trying to shoehorn those two things together.
Yeah.
And they're almost entirely, completely different beasts.
I think gaming in a lot of ways has become, because of the fact that it's a very money-driven industry now, compared to obviously the early days when nobody knew what worked in terms of popularity, so everyone was trying all sorts of different things, But I think gaming is very much it's trend driven. So what you were saying, Joe, is quite relevant, because a lot of first-person shooters have to have a multiplayer aspect to them. There's very few companies that will stick their neck out and just do a completely single-player FPS. I mean, I covered this in a video. Machine Games with the Wolfenstein series did it. They didn't. They said, right, we're not doing a multiplayer. We're just going to focus entirely on the single player, and that used to be the norm in the days of games like Doom. Partly because the technology wasn't there to do multiplayer. As easily.
Exactly.
You could still do it, obviously, but it was a bit more fiddly. So I'm wondering, is the fact that gaming is so driven by different trends, has it affected creativity in the sense that nobody's really willing to take as many risks as they were sort of several years ago in terms of trying to break open new genres maybe, or do something a bit different?
I think you're 100% correct, because you look at, like you said, with the multiplayer and the single player, a lot of the time now, like you said, it was all about single player. Everything was single player focused before the rise of online. But you look at it now, specifically, a lot of the times with EA and Ubisoft, it's online only now, and not just an online world. I'm talking about like multiplayer. I think that's because the multiplayer adds that hook and it keeps players invested for a longer period of time. When you look at like the XP system, they want to keep people engaged. They want to keep people buying the season passes, the DLC.
Yeah.
Like I said, it comes down to the money and keeping the hook in people. So the single player, when you look at from a profitability, tongue-twisted standpoint, there's just not as much money there. Like, it's a one-time buy and that's it. Or if you're not interested in the themes or the story of the game, then you won't buy it at all. Whereas the multiplayer comes down to just gameplay.
If you look at something like Destiny, it's like you take the basis for a game, and it's like you iterate on that game by adding elements to it, so it becomes it's like a snowball effect. Destiny is very different from when it was first released, because like you say, it's about getting people to buy the DLC, buy loot boxes or whatever, so that they can customize their character, and it's like a game becomes more about the franchise and less about the game itself. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it all comes down to the money, because when you think about it, let's use Destiny as an example. They've built the game, they've built the tools, they have the engine, and the base game's out, and now they can create DLC and sell you DLC for a fraction of the cost as what it actually took to build the game up from scratch, because they already have the tools, they have the assets, they have the knowledge, and making DLC is much cheaper than what it is actually making even a portion of the real game from scratch. But
from a gamer's point of view, does that make for a better game?
Well, I guess it depends on what kind of gamer you are, doesn't it?
I suppose
it does.
But when you look at some of you get some horror stories of people spending ridiculous amounts of money, but even people who are relatively sensible about it, you buy a game, and you were saying this the other day, Grant, about the fact that the core price of games hasn't really gone up that much.
No, it hasn't.
But actually, when you look at when you're buying a game now, if you buy, say, Call of Duty or Battlefield 1 or whatever it might be that you're buying, you buy the game. If you buy the core game, you're not going to be able to play the whole game, especially if you're playing online.
Yeah.
You have to buy the season pass. So in effect, you're not buying a $60 game or whatever it might be. You're in effect buying a $100 game, because you will, if you're going to stick with that game, you will end up spending that money. Because you don't want to be playing a map and then somebody moves on to the next map and you can't play it because you haven't got that map.
Exactly. And that
drives me nuts.
That was one of the major sticking points that people had with a game like Battlefront. When Battlefront was released last year, people looked at it and said, well, right, okay, well, it's only got 4 maps, and where's the content? But not only that, the season pass was the same price as the game itself. And it's almost like they were...
Oh, it's gone mental,
yeah, it's
hasn't
almost
it?
like they were
Sorry.
expecting you to buy the game, effectively buy the game twice, because they were saying, okay, we're going to hold back all this content for the season pass. You know, effectively, the full game, like you say, would cost $120 because it was something like 4 or 5 maps have been added to the game since the vanilla release. And they've also added extra heroes, extra game modes. But in order for you to fully experience that, like you say, you have to buy that season pass. And my sort of sticking point is with... I actually think context plays an important role in this, because I'm not naive to think... I know that games are a business now, and they've changed so much since the early days. You know, when we were as kids sat in front of the TV playing, well, in my case it was an Atari VCS. You know, it's a bit of a different experience now. I mean, sometimes when I think about how games have evolved, actually, it staggers me because they're so technically accomplished now. You know, but they're like movies in the sense that they have a similar budget, and in fact probably a higher budget than a lot of movies. But what I don't like is the way that the commercial aspect of gaming is a little bit exploitative of players sometimes. I mean, if you look at Battlefront as an example, it's like, yeah, gaming hasn't really changed. The cost of gaming hasn't changed in one aspect, but when you consider that, I mean, a game like The Witcher is a prime example. I bought both expansions for that, and instead of paying, I think I paid £40 for it when it was released, and then I paid £15 for the first expansion and about the same for the second. So that's cost me almost double the initial cost. I mean, I got my money's worth out of that game, but what I'm saying is that they were a bit more honest with that game about telling you what you were getting for your money. I mean, you could experience the full game with The Witcher.
That was actually one of the better examples,
exactly,
wasn't it? Because they actually gave you quite a lot of content for your
money.
And
they gave you free content as well. They used to add things for free to the game. But they weren't expecting you to buy the game again to experience the full thing, because the whole of the main quest line was wrapped up in the main game. So you weren't, being expected to pay for it again, effectively. And that sort of practice, I think, with companies like EA, they're not the only one that do it. But they're the most obvious example.
One of the worst examples I can think of something like this is the latest Hitman game, where if you bought the collector's edition, you got your nice statue or whatever, but you didn't get the bloody game.
I can't believe that.
Was it DLC only or something, or what? The game?
Well, basically, what happens is you could buy the small, you could get a digital download of the first map or whatever it was, and then you could incrementally buy it as it came out. And I think they're still putting out maps for it.
I think it just finished actually, and
did it just finish?
Over, I think it got a really, really good review as a whole package. But
well, I've got no problem with that at all. But the problem I had with it was the method with which they released it. I mean, and like I say, I did a video on this, and I don't want to go over it too much. But you could buy this bloody package which cost you over £100, and you get a bloody statue with it, that you could put on your shelf. But in effect, no fucking game in the package.
I don't get that.
Yeah.
And then you're waiting, and okay, it's had good reviews now, but you didn't know that at the time.
You're buying into something you have no idea about.
Exactly. It's crazy.
I mean, the Battlefront one was strange because the deluxe edition of that game gave you a pistol which was basically completely overpowered. So, you would get it, you would download it.
You're going to say a pistol that you shoot yourself in the head with.
If you played that for long enough, you probably would feel like doing that with Battlefront. I played it for 100 hours, but I'm a masochist. It was... What I'm trying to say is that games have evolved. Technically, they're so much better in what they can deliver as an experience. That's obvious. And that's mostly down to the technology and the fact that there's a lot more knowledge about how we can improve presentation, graphics, etc. But if I look at games today and I look at as an experience playing Super Mario World on the SNES, they're not necessarily better than that.
No.
You know, as an experience, that game was almost perfect. But then, like I was saying, it's the context of when you're playing it. Because if that's the top tier of the technology available to us at the time, then it's kind of like a ceiling effect, isn't it? You're not going to be able to get better than that.
Hypothetically say we never ever moved past the SNES, and the SNES was the only console ever available to this date as well. Do you think we would still be playing the SNES if nothing else came after that? Do you think
it's a good question,
the experiences that can be delivered, like you say, how they were so amazing back then, and they're not, the experiences now aren't necessarily better than what was back then? Do you think we'd still be playing? Due to, like, obviously you'd hit a brick wall and a limit with what the console can do. Would we get bored of the experiences? I
don't know. I mean, I know from my personal perspective, because the SNES had limitations, they had to make it all about the mechanics of the game in order to keep you hooked. Because visually, you could only do so much. I mean, there were companies like Rare that were getting things out of the console that people didn't think were possible with Donkey Kong Country and games like that. But I don't know if we would still be playing it. I know that some of my fondest gaming memories come from playing 4-player Mario Kart on the SNES with some friends after the pub, you know, and playing stuff like Castlevania and Mario World. But would we still be playing it?
I guess that kind of probably more what I'm trying to get at is, do you think the fact that we do constantly move forward in technology and games do change over the course of time, do you think it's a good thing? Because do you think if, I know I use the SNES as an example, but same could be said for the 360 or the PS3. If we aren't constantly moving forward, do you think we'd get bored of the experiences that generation or system offers us?
Well, I don't know, because we're never given the opportunity to actually stand still long enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that developing technology for the sake of it is not necessarily a good thing. Because the way the market works is you have to constantly give some people something new. Otherwise, they can't aspire to be getting something better than the thing they've already got. And advertising would never work. So I personally know I wouldn't necessarily be upset if we suddenly stopped at one point, whether it was the 360 or the SNES, because the way I see it is you don't necessarily have to keep iterating just to improve something, say, like only one aspect. You could say that gaming has improved visually and the audio has improved. And we've got the opportunity to make these amazing worlds like GTA and Witcher and Skyrim, etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean that gaming is mechanically better than it was 15 years ago.
Storytelling doesn't necessarily move forward as a result.
No, storytelling's not
graphics and
it's not dependent on technology, though, is it? Storytelling and narrative.
No, that's what I mean, though.
Well, partly it is, but
if you look at games now, I mean, I suppose in some respects the movement of technology has given game developers the opportunity to develop more complex narratives and so on, which you couldn't do certainly in the early days. I mean, you know,
that's true.
You compare something like The Last of Us with you know, stuff that we were playing even 10 years ago, and it's more complex even in terms of its storytelling and its character development and so on and so forth.
That's a very good point.
So I think, you know, it's a double-edged sword, I think, in some respects.
Yeah. I mean, you're right in the sense that it has allowed us to do things that wouldn't have been possible in earlier generations. That's definitely true. So it comes down to whether you know, game developers can keep giving us experiences that are keeping us entertained, I guess, you know, within the context of how we play games.
Well, I think you've touched on this before, and well, even tonight you touched on this, the indie development that's going on now.
Yeah.
If you look at what's happening there, I kind of think there's a parallel between what's going on with indie development in gaming and what happens in filmmaking. If you look at, you know, the AAA titles, they're like your, well, I think I said the other day, some of them are like your Michael Bay films, you know.
That was a good analogy, actually, yeah.
But then you've got your little indie games, and okay, it's like there's I don't know if you've heard of this. There's a thing called Sturgeon's Law, which was there's a science fiction writer who came up with this, Theodore Sturgeon, and he came up with 90% of science fiction's crap.
Yeah.
But then 90% of everything's crap.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, I would say if you take the average Hollywood, film releases, 99% of them are crap. They're sort of lowest common denominator. Like you say, Michael Bay. I mean, if you look at the proliferation of like the comic book movies, it's like one after the other. It's like a conveyor belt. There's not enough. There's not necessarily
Call of Duty.
Yeah, Call of Duty, FIFA, yearly franchises. Obviously, there are indie developers that are willing to take the risk because they're not driven by spending $300 million developing a game, which cannot fail.
Yeah, and when you do that, you're into what the cornflakes factor. Cornflakes sells, so you're trying to create cornflakes
Yes,
again.
Exactly. It's good in the sense that because it's a low barrier to entry on consoles for indie developers, we're getting games like Inside, we're getting games like Life is Strange because they're allowed almost to experiment in terms of creativity because there's less at stake.
It's less risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So gamers are getting. There's a lot of choice nowadays. I think one of the positive ways in which gaming has evolved is we have so much choice in terms of what type of games that we can play. If we want to play the big budget games, the bombastic Call of Duty type games, we can. But we can also play these indie games, which aren't, I think the attitude towards them has changed. I think in the early days, people looked at them and thought, what's that pixelated crap? It looks like it's 20 years old. But if you're willing to sit down and actually look at these games closely, you'll realise that they're trying to move the narrative back to the game being about the mechanical aspect, how we interact with
about being a game.
A game, exactly. As an experience, as a pure experience, rather than a sort of Hollywood movie that you can take in control of, which is like Call of Duty is.
And if you look at something like Inside, which you and I both love, it offers a depth of experience that is way beyond a lot of the AAAs.
It is.
And it's only 3 hours long, something like that, but it's 3 hours of intense, well, pleasure's the wrong word, but it's 3 hours where you're really invested in what's going on.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's still with me. I said to you the other day, I think it's still with me now. I played it 6 weeks ago or something. I finished playing it.
Yeah.
And it's still with me now, and I still think about it. And that's really worth playing. That's a game worth playing.
In a way, it's like a really good book. I find that a really good book will stay with you for a long time. And I agree with you. The game, I still think about the game. And the reason is because every aspect of that time playing it was memorable.
Yeah.
Obviously, because games seem to have become, these big budget productions, there's a lot of open world games now, and they seem to be one of the dominant genres. An open world game you're going to be spending upwards of 100 hours in. Not every one of those hours is going to be memorable. You're going to get downtime. And the difference with an indie game is that, like Inside, is each minute you spend in a game like that is notable, it's memorable, and that's why probably it stays with you longer. So gaming has evolved, obviously, in good and bad ways, I would say. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground today. So just to end, do we want to just talk briefly about what our plans are for the coming week?
Well, I'm actually intending on playing some games for a change. I'm going to try and get a go on Gears 4 this week.
We'll have to play some Horde.
Hopefully. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Hopefully we can maybe hook up and play a bit of that, but don't laugh at me because, as I've told you before, I'm utterly crap.
That's right. You won't be getting any kills anyway. I'll be taking all the kills. So.
Oh, well, I'll let you. I don't mind. I'll stand in the background and get some reflected glory.
I'll carry you for free XP.
Cool.
Cheers, man.
Okay. How about you, Sully?
Well, as far as what I've got planned, it looks like I'm carrying Joe. And yeah, other than
don't want to do that for too long. I'm a bit heavy these days.
Other than that, no, not too much. I'm working on a couple of YouTube videos, like I said earlier, the one I've got going up tomorrow. And other than that, yeah, playing some Gears of War, Battlefield 1, and then unfortunately back to work next week.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm going to be probably playing a bit more Skyrim, but I would want to play Titanfall 2 as well, because I hear good things about the campaign and the multiplayer, so I'm going to be doing that. And working on a couple of YouTube videos, one of which is tied into what we've been talking about today, which is how I want to make a video on from Sky. It's called From Skyrim to The Witcher 3: How the RPG Genre has Evolved in like just 5 years. So that's one. The other one is hopefully going to be a part 2, which is the FPS video.
By the way, I'm going to
Yeah.
start treating this part 2 as kind of like Half-Life 3, and anything you say, I could potentially take as part 2 being confirmed.
Yeah. Okay. I better be careful what I say now. Well, thank you guys. It's been a good episode. And other than that, thank you for listening if you've made it this far. And just to say that our next episode will be 2 weeks from now. Again, you can find our individual channels in the description below. But thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.